The fluorescent lights of the Veil sanctum never dimmed. That was the first thing every new staff member learned. Not the protocols for silver contamination, not the emergency evacuation routes, not even the 3-digit code for the panic room on sublevel 2. The first thing they learned was that the lights on the 4th floor never dimmed because darkness was not a comfort here. Darkness was a weapon, and the things housed in the high-security containment wing, the section the overnight staff called the obsidian cage, knew exactly how to use it. The Veil Sanctum existed in the gap between the world people knew and the world that had always been there, just beneath the surface of things. The Covenant managed that gap. Think of it as a treaty organization, a kind of international authority for a civilization most humans would never see. Vampires, shifters, blood workers, creatures of old power who had learned over centuries that survival required rules. The Covenant made to enforce those rules. It mediated disputes, controlled information, and when necessary, it contained those who could not contain themselves. The man in room 402 was one of those. Dr. Harlan Cross stood behind the reinforced observation glass, a clipboard pressed flat against his chest like a shield. He was 53 years old, had spent 19 of those years working in supernatural trauma medicine, and had never, not once, requested a behavioral containment order for a patient. He was requesting one now. Inside room 402, the man known as Lucian Voss was coming apart. He was restrained, silver-laced cuffs at both wrists, a secondary tether at his left ankle, a chest harness bolted to a steel-plated hospital bed. By any reasonable measure, he should not have been able to move. A man with third-stage blood rot, bilateral shrapnel wounds across the torso, and a core temperature hovering at 104 degrees should not have been capable of sustained violence. Lucian Voss was not a reasonable man. He had already put one orderly in the medical wing with a fractured clavicle. He had hurled a stainless steel bedpan at the last physician who entered, a Covenant psychiatrist with 30 years of specialized experience, and the man had required 4 stitches above his left eyebrow. In the past 6 hours, Lucian had ripped out 2 IV lines, bitten through a restraint strap rated for supernatural strength, and screamed himself raw, calling out the names of men who had been dead for 3 years. Cross watched him now. The silver cuffs had cut deep into Lucian's wrists, thin lines of dark blood tracking down his forearms and dripping from his fingers. His eyes were wide open, blown black with fever and whatever nightmare his dying brain was projecting onto the walls of that room. He was not seeing a hospital. "He's pulling against the left cuff again," Cross said quietly. "Third time in 40 minutes. Beside him, Nurse Bellard crossed her arms. She was a tall woman with a face built for skepticism. "I can't send another person in there, Doctor. We've maxed the haloperidol protocol. He metabolizes it faster than we can administer it." "His system fights the medication the same way it fights everything else," Cross said. "Centuries of survival instinct. His body doesn't know the difference between a threat and a treatment." Inside the room, Lucian twisted his head toward the glass. His eyes didn't focus. He was looking at something behind them, something that existed only in the fever country of his mind. "Silas." His voice was a torn thing, stripped of its edges. "Silas, get down. East Ridge. Get down right now." He yanked hard against the cuff. The bed frame shifted 2 inches on the floor bolts. Cross picked up his pen, set it down. On the chart he had written, "Blood rot advancing to stage 4, recommend sedation-induced coma within the hour." Then the door to the observation station opened. She didn't announce herself. A woman in faded scrubs, brown hair pulled back in a knot that had been neat some hours ago and wasn't anymore, carrying a thermos of coffee in both hands like it was the only solid thing in the world. Her ID badge read S. Wyndham, RN, Blood Healer, Level 3. She looked at the chart rack, then at Cross, then through the glass, at Lucian Voss, without any particular change in expression. "I'm here for the 1900 shift," she said. "I was told I'm taking 402. Cross turned fully to face her. We're preparing a behavioral sedation protocol. I read the file. She set her thermos on the counter. Blood rot, stage 3 advancing. Multiple shrapnel injuries to the torso. Severe psychotic break with battle hallucinations. He's reliving an operation. He broke a man's collarbone this morning with a water pitcher, Bellard said flatly. Sarah Wyndham looked through the glass. In room 402, Lucian had gone briefly still. The terrible stillness of a man surfacing through fever long enough to drown again. His lips moved. He was calling out names, not orders this time, just names, one after another, in a sequence that never changed. Sarah watched him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, gone before anyone could read it. "Don't put him under," she said. Cross set down his clipboard. "Excuse me? If you sedate him into a coma, he stays in it." Her voice was low and without drama. "He's not fighting you? He's fighting the ambush. His brain thinks he's back in the valley. If you sedate him, you trap him there. You don't end the nightmare. You lock him inside it." "And you think you can ground him," Bellard said. "I think you need his antibiotics running inside the next 40 minutes, and you can't get a line in while he's thrashing." Sarah moved to the supply cart and pulled on a pair of gloves with the practiced motion of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "So yes, I'll go in." The station went quiet in the particular way of people who are out of options, examining someone else's option and not liking what they see. Cross said, "Liability. I can't authorize. There's a waiver in the intake packet. Page 7. She was already tying an isolation gown over her scrubs. "I'll sign it." Bellard looked at Cross. Cross looked at his watch. In the room beyond the glass, Lucian Voss began to pull against the chest harness with both arms simultaneously. His teeth clenched so hard, a vein stood out from his temple. The heart monitor climbed toward 150. "Security is 30 seconds out if he goes for you," Bellard said. "Then send them in," Sarah said. "But wait until he goes for me." She swiped her badge. The heavy magnetic lock disengaged. Sarah did not hesitate at the threshold. She walked through the door, let it close behind her, and stood still. The room smelled of antiseptic and fever sweat and faint copper. The only sounds were Lucian's wet, labored breathing and the strain of the restraints. His head snapped toward her, eyes blown black. Not rage, something older and more dangerous than rage. The evaluating focus of a predator encountering an unexpected variable. He did not see a nurse. In the theater, his burning mind was running. He saw something else. "Contact front," he rasped. He lunged. The bed heaved against the floor bolts and crashed back down. Sarah did not retreat. She stood with her hands at her sides, palms open, held low, not defensive, not placating, attentive. The posture of someone who had been in dangerous rooms before, not hospital rooms, but the other kind. She waited until he had fully committed to the movement before she spoke. "Lucian." He pulled against the restraints, the silver cuffs cutting deeper. Blood ran in slow, dark lines down his wrists. The heart monitor screamed. "You left us," he snarled. "You left us in the valley." Sarah moved, not quickly, with a measured efficiency that had no business belonging to a level 3 blood healer. She closed the distance to the bedside as Lucian's right hand came free of the strap and swept a heavy plastic pitcher off the side table. He threw it. It connected with her shoulder, a solid impact that would leave a fist-shaped bruise by morning. She didn't cry out. She absorbed it and used the fraction of a second his overextension bought her to step inside his reach, close enough that he couldn't wind up again. She leaned down. Her face was inches from his. She ignored the heat radiating off him, the spit and the rage, and the centuries of learned lethality behind those black eyes. And she whispered 5 words, not loud enough for Cross and Bellard, pressed against the observation glass, to make out any of them. Ashbourne, Crimson Veil, Endgame. No. The effect was instantaneous, not gradual, not the slow tide of sedatives going out, instantaneous, as if something had been cut. Lucian's arm dropped. The tension left his neck. His jaw unclenched. The monitor's frantic rhythm stuttered, slowed, fell back toward something that resembled normal. His eyes came into focus. They found Sarah's face, and they stayed there. Outside the glass, Cross had stopped breathing entirely. Ballard had her hand over her mouth. Lucian looked at Sarah with the evaluating stillness of a man who has encountered something that does not fit any existing category. Not rage, not confusion, something older and more careful than both. The look of a man who has just discovered that the architecture of everything he understood about the last 3 years of his life has a door in it he didn't know was there. "Who?" His voice was stripped to its frame. "Who are you?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She reached down and loosened the restraint that had been cutting into his wrist. Careful, precise movements. He watched her hands the entire time. Calloused, steady. She had the hands of someone who had done difficult things for a long time. He didn't pull away. "The infection is winning," she said, her voice returning to professional level. "I need the antibiotics running. The line in your left arm is intact. I need you to hold still." He looked at her. The evaluating stillness deepened. "You said the code," he said. "I did." "That operation is redacted. It doesn't exist." "I know." She prepped the IV line. "That's why you're going to let me treat you. Because right now, I'm the only person in this building who knows you aren't losing your mind." Something moved behind his eyes. The weapon readiness receded by degrees. "Crimson Veil," he said quietly. "The operation's comm channel. Overwatch frequency." Sarah paused. She looked up from the IV line and met his eyes directly. "I was the voice, Lucian. I was the one talking to you in the valley. I was the one who told you to hold your position on the East Ridge." The heart monitor registered a single sharp spike. Then it steadied. Lucian looked at the ceiling, the long exhale of a man pressing down on a wound to keep from bleeding out. "Then you're the reason I'm alive," he said. Sarah held his gaze. She didn't look away from what came next. "And the reason your men are dead." Lucian closed his eyes. He swallowed once. Even the water she offered tasted of ash, of the valley, of everything that had ended there and never fully stopped ending. "We have a great deal to talk about," Sarah said. "But first, the medicine." Slowly, in the manner of a man who has not made a voluntary concession in a very long time and is therefore taking his time about it, Lucian Voss extended his arm. He stopped fighting. Outside the observation glass, Ballard exhaled for the first time in what felt like several minutes. She stared at the room where the most dangerous patient in the Veil Sanctum was lying still under the hands of a transfer nurse who had been on shift for less than 30 minutes. "What did she say to him?" Cross whispered. Ballard shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she said. "But look at him. He looks like a man who just found out the ghost was real." The piece of paper was small. A single printed sheet folded twice. Sarah held it with 2 fingers and set it on the tray table beside Lucian's arm. "Read the medication list," she said. "Third column, the dosage on the blood purge compound." Lucian read the way he did everything, with the patient, methodical attention of a man who understood that a missed detail was the difference between walking out of a situation and not walking out at all. He stopped at the 3rd column. His jaw tightened. Not surprise. The quiet internal reckoning of a man doing math he already suspected the answer to. "That dosage," he said. "At your current body weight and metabolic suppression rate from the blood rot, cardiac arrest within 4 minutes of administration. Full system failure within 8. Sarah folded the paper and tucked it back into her pocket. "The order was entered into the system 2 hours ago. The physician who signed it has no record in the Sanctum staff registry. No credentialing file. No biometric entry log. He doesn't exist." Lucian looked at the IV bag above his arm. 6 o'clock, he said. 6:15, when the physician comes to confirm the outcome. She looked at the clock above the door. The time was 3:47 in the morning. "We have a little over 2 hours. How do we leave?" "The Sanctum security operates on biometric scan at every exit and every elevator except one. Sarah moved to the supply cart and opened the lower cabinet. She removed a large black bag, heavy-gauge vinyl, sealed with a full-length zipper, and set it on the floor beside his bed. The morgue elevator in the sub-basement doesn't require a badge swipe. It runs on a separate maintenance circuit. The orderlies use it for patient transfers to the loading bay. There's a private transport vehicle waiting there. A contact left it unlocked. Lucian looked at the bag. He looked at it for a long moment, with the expression of a man reviewing his available options and finding the inventory deeply unsatisfactory. "No," he said. "Yes," Sarah said. "I have held territory against armies. I have negotiated treaties that kept entire regions from burning. You have approximately 2 hours and 11 minutes before someone walks in here with a bag of compound and a false smile." She met his eyes without apology. "The morgue elevator is the only way out of this floor without triggering a security alert, which means you go out the way the dead go out, or you don't go out at all." The silence that followed had a particular texture, the texture of a man with centuries of pride conducting a very rapid and very reluctant negotiation with his own survival instinct. The survival instinct won. "If you tell anyone about this," Lucian said quietly, "I will be very difficult about it." "I'll keep it between us," Sarah said, and began preparing the transfer. Getting Lucian Voss into a body bag was an exercise in controlled suffering. His left leg refused to cooperate. He suppressed the sound that tried to come out of him when Sarah shifted his weight, converting it into a grinding pressure behind his back teeth. His vision grayed at the edges. He breathed through it with the mechanical discipline of a man who had been managing pain longer than most civilizations had existed. Sarah worked without commentary. She was strong in the practical, load-bearing sense of someone who had spent years moving patients who couldn't move themselves. She braced his weight, guided his movements, and did not ask him if he was all right. He appreciated that more than he would ever say. "Dissociate," she said quietly, when the worst of it was done. "Go somewhere else in your head." "I have a preferred location," Lucian said through his teeth. "A ridge above the Adriatic. Summer. Circa 1683. Go there. You're not invited. I'll manage the disappointment." She zipped the bag to his chest. "Absolute silence from this point. If you groan, if you say a single word, we're done." "I don't make noise when I'm in pain." "What do you do?" A pause. "Old Norse," he admitted. Sarah zipped the bag shut. Darkness. The smell of vinyl and industrial disinfectant. The sound of his own breathing, amplified and close. The lurch of the gurney as Sarah unlocked the wheels. Then motion. The particular quality of being moved by someone else through a space you cannot see. He focused on the Adriatic ridge. Warm stone, salt air, the sound of the sea. The gurney wheels squeaked with every third rotation. Sarah's footsteps were even and unhurried. He could hear the distant ambient noise of the overnight ward, the soft beeping of monitors, the fluorescent hum that never went away, a cart being pushed somewhere on a parallel corridor. Then a voice, close. "Heading out already, Wyndham?" Nurse bellowed. "Near the station." A half-second pause, less. "Transferring to sublevel, grabbing more saline on the way back up." Entirely ordinary. The voice of someone performing a routine task on a quiet shift. He finally settled down. "Out like a light. Fever broke 20 minutes ago. Should be a quiet rest of the night." Thank God. Genuine relief. First quiet shift in a week, maybe. The gurney kept moving. The corridor sounds faded. Harder acoustics. The elevator lobby. A small mechanical click. The chime of the elevator arriving. They rolled in. The doors closed. The descent was slow. Sealed inside the bag, it felt like the earth swallowing him whole. Lucian held the image of the Adriatic ridge with both hands and did not move. The doors opened. Cold air. The sub-basement, at least 10 degrees colder. The dense, older silence of a space that was not built for the living. "Clear," Sarah whispered. She unzipped the bag to his chest. Cold air flooded in, and Lucian breathed it fully, suppressing the cough that wanted to come with it. He stared at a concrete ceiling and the pale wash of utility lighting. "That," he said very quietly, "was the longest 3 minutes of my life." "You did well?" "I was in the Adriatic." "I know. You were murmuring." A pause. "It was Old Norse." He said nothing. The loading bay door swung outward into the night. Beyond it, cold air carried pine and exhaust. A black transport vehicle, private, unmarked, the kind used by funeral homes, was backed up to the ramp with its rear doors closed. Sarah moved to open them. She had taken 3 steps when the shadow detached from the pillar beside the driver's side. "You're off rotation early, Healer Wyndham." The voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it. A man stepped into the wash of the bay's overhead light. Late 50s. Silver hair swept back from a face that expensive preservation had kept handsome past its natural limit. Dark suit. Eyes that cataloged the room the way accountants catalog losses, systematically, without feeling. Victor Crane, CEO of Obsidian Accord, the private defense contractor that handled the Covenant's most sensitive and most deniable operational logistics. A man whose name appeared on $4 billion of active contracts and on no records that any investigation had ever made stick. Beside him stood a single operative. Sarah's hand found the scalpel in her scrub pocket. She didn't need to use it alone. From the gurney, without warning, the bag opened. Lucian Voss sat up. He was pale as chalk, and his movements carried the careful deliberateness of a man operating on willpower rather than physical reserves. But the impact of him, even diminished, even half-broken, was considerable. Centuries left marks, not on the face, not in the way ordinary time wears people down, but in the quality of how he occupied space, as though the air around him had learned to be cautious. Lucian came off the gurney and put the operative on the ground with an efficiency that was almost administrative, a joint lock applied with the muscle memory of someone who had been doing this since before gunpowder was a concept. He stood over the downed man, breathing hard but steady. Crane watched this with the expression of a man updating a calculation. "You're in worse shape than I expected," he said, "and you're standing in a loading bay at 4 a.m. because your plan required oversight." Lucian's voice, even stripped by illness, carried a particular resonance, the voice of a man accustomed to being the most significant thing in any room. "Which tells me the physician you sent couldn't be trusted to verify a kill without you watching." "You always were perceptive, Ashbourne." "What was in the valley?" Lucian asked. His voice had gone very quiet. "My team is dead. You've been standing at the door to make sure I finish dying. What did we see?" Something moved behind Crane's eyes, the faintest compression of a man deciding how much honesty is tactically useful. Then he turned and moved toward the ramp access door. "Detain them," he said to no one visible. 3 more operatives came through the side door. Sarah used the scalpel. Lucian threw the first man into the second. The third took an elbow to the jaw and went down hard. Crane was through the ramp door and gone, unhurried, as though this had been a minor inconvenience in a long evening. Lucian stood in the middle of the loading bay, chest heaving, 3 unconscious operatives on the floor around him, watching the door close. "He ran," he said. There was something almost offended in his voice. "He doesn't run," Sarah said, already behind the wheel of the transport vehicle. "He retreats to a better position. We have 12 minutes before this bay becomes complicated. Get in." They drove for 6 hours. Sarah switched highways 3 times, took unmarked roads through dark mountain passes, doubled back twice in patterns that Lucian, even through the low-grade haze of blood rot and exhausted adrenaline, recognized as counter-surveillance routing. She had connected him to a portable IV before they left the bay, the real antibiotics from her personal kit. When the vehicle finally stopped, the sky was beginning to gray at the edges. A cabin. Old timber dark with weather, set back from a gravel track in dense pine forest. No lights visible from the road. My father's property, Sarah said, opening the rear doors. Covenant analyst, retired, paranoid. No one knows I kept the deed. No cell service, well water, generator power. She looked at the dark tree line. We're safe here, for now. Once he was inside and the fire was built, the smell of pine sap and old wood began to replace the antiseptic smell that had followed them out of the sanctum. Lucian looked at the ceiling from the old leather couch. Sarah sat on the floor in front of the hearth, and the firelight moved across her face in slow, uneven waves. The valley, he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah looked into the fire for a moment. Then she turned to face him directly. I was a senior intelligence analyst for Covenant Intelligence, she said. Seconded to Special Operations. Operation Crimson Veil was mine. From the initial target assessment through the mission profile, I wrote the recommendation that put your team on that ridge. A breath. The signals data indicated a high-value meeting. Senior enemy command elements. I assessed the area as clean. I authorized the insertion. The area was not clean, Lucian said. No, her voice carried no plea for clemency. The intelligence was fabricated. Someone had seeded the intercept channels with false data, a sophisticated patient operation. I didn't catch it. I analyzed the intercepts, and I said the area was clear, and I was wrong, and 6 men went into that valley on my word. The fire popped and settled. Lucian looked at the ceiling. The names moved through him in the order they always came, the order they had been coming for 3 years, in the fever and outside of it. Marcus, Dre, Connell, Holt, Fenn, Silas. Tell me about Marcus, he said. Sarah understood immediately what he was asking and why. She told him. The east ridge, the first volley, the way Marcus had covered the left flank until he couldn't any more. She told him about Dre and about Connell and about each of the others in turn. She gave him every detail the drone feed and the comms record had captured. She did not rush. She did not minimize. She let him carry each one fully before she moved to the next. This was the thing a commanding officer required, not comfort, not absolution, but the precise knowledge of what had happened to the people he had led. It was a matter of honor. You did not get to not know. When she was finished, the fire had burned down to a lower heat. You stayed on the comms line, Lucian said finally. After the radio went down, I heard a voice. 4 hours, Sarah said. After your signal died, my supervisor ordered me to switch frequencies. I refused. She paused. I don't know if you could hear me. I could hear you, Lucian said. Then Sarah reached under the couch and withdrew a metal box from behind the old fireplace tools. She set it on the table and opened it. Inside, a high-frequency military radio, a stack of cash, and a hard drive, matte black military spec casing. This drive contains the raw signals intercepts from that night, she said. The original data, before my supervisor told me the analysis had been reviewed and superseded. I made a copy before I handed my terminal over. She looked at it steadily. It's encrypted. To open it, we need the decryption architecture from the Obsidian Accord mainframe. The data proves we were deliberately sent into a kill box, Lucian said. It proves the signals were fabricated. It proves someone with access to Covenant intelligence infrastructure manufactured the operation. She paused. And Crane is the only contractor with that level of access and sufficient motive. What was the motive? What do you remember seeing in the valley? She said. Before the ambush, through the scope. Lucian went very still. The memory was there, had always been there, sealed behind the fever and the years of managed survival. He knew it was there. He had understood on some level that it was the reason he was still a target. He had simply not yet made himself open the door. He opened it now, the scope, the compound below, the bearded men he had expected, and then a figure that did not belong. A man in a vest, civilian cut, too expensive for the terrain, carrying a case, meeting the warlord with the relaxed manner of a transaction, not a negotiation, turning his face upward, as if sensing the scope above him. Victor Crane. A blood relic exchange, Lucian said, his voice dropping to something very low and very final. He was running a blood relic through that warlord's supply chain, a weapon the Covenant banned a century ago, capable of controlling vampire populations at scale. He paused. My team didn't die because of a bad intelligence call. They died because they were looking through the wrong scope at the wrong moment and saw something that could destroy a $4 billion operation. Yes, Sarah said. The word fell into the room like a stone into deep water. Then, there's more. He looked at her. The survival signal. I pulled it off the Obsidian Accord's passive monitoring network 3 weeks ago while I was building the extraction plan. She didn't look away from him. Lucian, Silas Vane, is alive. The fire settled. He's been in an Obsidian Accord containment facility since 6 days after the valley, Sarah said. Crane took him, kept him. He knew if you ever surfaced and started remembering, Silas was the card he could play against you. He let you believe you left him behind. He built that grief into you deliberately. The silence that followed was the silence of a man reassembling the load-bearing walls of 3 years. Where is the facility? Lucian asked. Northern Virginia. Rural. Crane is hosting a charity gala there in 3 months. Wounded warriors of the Covenant. He does it every year. Wounded veterans used as donor photo props while he collects the tax write-off. The flatness in her voice carried something hard beneath it. But the gala means civilian access. No biometric clearance at the front entrance. For one night, the front door is open. Lucian looked at his left leg, at the IV still running into his arm, at the drive on the table and the radio, and the woman who had sent him into the valley and stayed on the line for 4 hours and spent 3 years carrying the weight of it before walking into his hospital room tonight with a thermos of coffee and 5 words that had cut through everything else like they were nothing. 3 months, he said. You need to heal properly, Sarah said, all the way, because where we're going, you can't limp into it. Lucian Voss, 4 centuries of war and winter, and the long patience of a predator who had outlasted everything else, looked at the hard drive on the table between them. Then we have work to do, he said. 3 months is a long time when you are trying not to think. It is a short time when you are trying to become lethal again. Lucian spent the first 3 weeks horizontal, which he found intolerable. The blood rot retreated by degrees, not gracefully, not all at once, but in the grinding way of a prolonged siege, each day surrendering a little more ground to the antibiotics and the clean mountain air, and the sleep that came harder than it should have. The fever broke fully on a Tuesday. He knew it was Tuesday because Sarah had taped a calendar to the cabin wall, which he found both practical and quietly insulting. By the 6th week, he was moving through the tree line in the gray pre-dawn, relearning the grammar of his own body. The left leg was permanent. The muscle tissue had healed imperfectly, in the way that field repairs always did, and the result was a slight drag on the left side that no amount of work would fully correct. He worked anyway. The basement became a war room. Satellite imagery covered the east wall. Sarah had rebuilt a decommissioned surveillance drone with focused patience, tuning it with the methodical care of someone translating raw intelligence into executable plans. She had the operational mind of someone accustomed to converting information into action. Watching her work, Lucian found, was like watching a craftsperson do something difficult and make it appear otherwise. By the end of the 2nd month, they had a plan. By the end of the 3rd, Lucian's drag was invisible at walking pace. He could not run, but he could hunt, and for what they were walking into, hunting was sufficient. The carbine, collected from Crane's operative in the loading bay 3 months prior, went into the facility disassembled inside a garment bag lined with a signal-dampening layer. Standard Covenant field material, available through the same dark market contact in Baltimore who had sourced Sarah's surveillance equipment. The front security scan registered nothing of interest. In the stairwell, Lucian reassembled it in 40 seconds. His hands still knew how. The gala was everything Sarah had described, and worse. Chandeliers hung from industrial ceilings, polished concrete floors reflected 500 people in evening wear, conducting the elaborate performance of virtue that expensive charity events require. Servers moved through the crowd with champagne flutes. Silent auction tables displayed items no one intended to bid on, and along the east wall, arranged carefully where the chandelier light caught them best. 6 veterans in wheelchairs, dressed in their service finery, positioned for photographs, not mingling, not speaking to donors, positioned. A photographer was arranging a donor beside a young man in a wheelchair who was smiling with his mouth while his eyes were somewhere far away and entirely unreachable. Lucian stood near the bar with a glass of sparkling water, wearing a dark suit that fit with the understated authority of a man who had never needed clothing to announce anything. Full beard. 3 months of recovery had restored enough of his physical presence that no one in this room looked twice at a limping veteran consultant. He looked at the young man's eyes. He picked up his water glass and turned away before he did something inadvisable. "I'm at the service corridor," Sarah said in his earpiece. The midnight blue evening gown had concealed beneath it a close-fitting tactical layer she had changed into 4 minutes ago in a third-floor restroom. "Camera loop is running. 60 seconds to the North Fire stairwell." Lucian set his glass on the bar and moved, past the champagne station, past the silent auction, through the staff access door that Sarah had confirmed would be on its manual latch for the next 4 minutes while the security rotation completed its cycle. The door swung closed behind him. The noise of the gala dropped away. "Clear," he said quietly, and took the stairs down. The sub-basement was cold and loud with server cooling systems, a deep mechanical breathing that filled the corridor with white noise. The air smelled of circulated coolant and warm electronics. Sarah was already at the junction when he arrived. She was at the keypad, a compact decryption tool in hand, eyes moving between the device and the door with focused economy. 20 seconds, she said without looking up. Lucian positioned himself at the corridor junction, his back to the wall, the carbine held low. He heard boots. 2 men, tactical gear, moving in the efficient paired pattern of trained security. Not performing security, doing it. He moved out of the shadow in the half-second before their eyes adjusted and closed the distance without firing. The butt of the carbine into the first man's solar plexus, a controlled takedown. The second man had time to register what was happening, and nothing more before Lucian struck the ceramic plate of his vest with 2 precise impacts and guided him down. He dragged both men into the janitor's alcove. Neither had a chance to call in. The keypad light turned green. "In," Sarah said. The server room stretched away in both directions, row upon row of black towers, blinking with slow blue indicator lights that created, in aggregate, a cold and rhythmic luminescence. The cooling fans produced a sound like sustained breathing. Sarah ran to the main terminal. The drive went in. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. "Upload beginning," she said. "Compressing the packet. Trying for 2.5 minutes." A red indicator light began strobing on the ceiling. Silent alarm. "They know," Lucian said, checking the magazine. "How long?" "Upload at 20%. A shift in her voice, not panic, but the focused tightening of someone encountering a problem and processing it in real time. "The encryption is mutating. The firewall is rewriting itself actively. Someone with Covenant system-level access is running countermeasures against this upload right now." A beat. "Crane has an embedded operative inside the Covenant, infrastructure level. They're watching this in real time." She was already rewriting. "I have to manually override the handshake protocol. 3 minutes. You have 2. The elevator at the far end of the corridor hummed to life. What followed was close-quarters work in a narrow corridor with inadequate lighting and too many variables. Lucian suppressed the approach twice, drove the assault team back to the elevator lobby once, took a graze along his left forearm that he didn't register until later. When the flashbang came, he had been waiting for it, had heard the distinctive mechanical sound of the pin and the throw. He turned away, covered his ears, and wrote out the concussive whiteout with the practiced discipline of a man who had encountered this particular unpleasantness before flashbang technology existed. In the room behind him, Sarah said, 90%. The door began to give way at the lock. 95. He fired his last 3 rounds through the doorframe at chest height. Done. Flat. Absolute. It's out. Washington Post Secure Drop. FBI Cyber Division. Supernatural Oversight Council Independent Server. Distributed and irretrievable. Exit. Now. He put the carbine through the ventilation grate near the floor, kicked it inward. Sarah pulled the drive from the port and crossed the room in 4 strides. She went through the opening without hesitation. Lucian followed as the door gave way behind him, and the chute took them both down into the dark. They came out onto the concrete floor of the underground parking structure. Oil, cold cement, exhaust, rows of vehicles in low sodium light. The exit ramp was visible at the north end. 50 yards of open floor. They walked. They had covered 30 yards when the voice came from behind them. I wouldn't. Victor Crane stepped out from behind a black armored SUV. Composed. Tuxedo unruffled. Silver hair catching the overhead light. Moving with the unhurried certainty of a man who arrived at conclusions in advance and waited for everyone else to catch up. Beside him stood Silas Vane. Alive. 34 years old. Lean and diminished in the way of someone who had been maintained rather than cared for, kept functional, kept present, kept available. His hands were bound in silver cuffs. His eyes, when they found Lucian across the 30 feet of concrete between them, carried 3 years of things that had no available language. Lucian stopped walking. Something passed across his face that was not readable as a single emotion. Something assembled from relief and fury and a grief that had been sitting in the wrong room for 3 years and had just found the right one. 4 tactical contractors flanked Crane, weapons raised. Weapons, laser sights making small red points on Lucian's chest, on Sarah's. In Crane's right hand, a remote detonator, military grade, thumb on the plunger. I monitored the upload, Crane said pleasantly. Clever work, Wyndham. Genuinely impressive. He tilted his head. It doesn't matter. By morning, the narrative will be corrected. 2 unstable individuals, a disgraced healer with documented protocol violations and a vampire king who spent 3 months in behavioral containment, broke into a charity event. They killed guards. They caused a panic. His voice carried no heat. The voice of a man reading from a document written in advance. And tragically, they detonated a device in the parking structure, bringing down the east wing of the facility on top of 300 people. He raised the detonator slightly. Lucian looked at the columns, C4 blocks, wired and blinking at the base of 3 structural supports. Drop the weapon, Crane said, and your man inside the Covenant walks away clean. Everyone goes home. The smile of someone holding all the cards. You have about 10 seconds before this becomes irreversible. Lucian looked at him steadily. Your man inside the Covenant has already been identified. The upload included his complete access logs, every countermeasure he ran tonight, time-stamped and attributed. He is not walking away from anything. The smile didn't disappear, but something behind it did. Sarah confirmed it with a single nod. She had built the attribution file into the upload 3 weeks ago. Crane's thumb pressed incrementally on the plunger. Lucian turned his eyes to Silas. Silas looked back at him across 30 feet of concrete and 3 years of manufactured absence. The look of a man who has been waiting in the way that only people who have truly run out of alternatives learn to wait. With the whole body, with every remaining resource directed toward the single act of endurance. Lucian breathed once, and then so quietly that only Silas could possibly hear it. Ashbourne, Crimson Veil, Endgame. The words that meant, the mission is complete. Stand down. Trust me. Silas understood them. He had always understood them. He closed his eyes for 1/2 second and then opened them, And then, with the precise and deliberate movement of a man who has been waiting 3 years for this exact moment, shifted his weight left, putting himself between Crane and the structural pillar directly above the main fire suppression line running along the ceiling. Just enough. Sarah was already moving. She had cataloged the pressure valve on her way through the bay. The way she cataloged everything, automatically, the habit of someone for whom the environment was always operational data. She reached the manual override on the wall beside the parking ramp in 2 strides and opened it fully. The industrial fire suppression line ran at 300 pounds per square inch of stored pressure. When the valve opened, it did not simply flow. The pipe above Crane's position failed at its weakest junction, and the water came down. The way structural failures always come, all at once, with no warning, with the force of something that had been held back for a long time and was no longer. Crane went down. Both nearest contractors went down with him. The remaining 2 flinched back, blinded and disoriented by the sudden wall of cold water and the roar of escaping pressure. Lucian moved through it, wet before he reached Crane. Cold water and irrelevance, a texture. He moved the way he had always moved when the space cleared, with the focused unhurry of someone who had learned long ago that speed means nothing if the direction is wrong. Crane was on his hands and knees, the detonator 6 feet away, sliding toward the drain. He crawled for it. The composure, that expensive, carefully maintained composure, was gone, stripped away by the cold water and the collapse of the plan, and the sight of Lucian Voss covering the distance with a slight drag on the left leg, and no visible awareness of having been shot at multiple times in the last 15 minutes. Crane's fingers touched the detonator casing. Lucian stepped on his hand. The detonator slid the remaining 2 feet into the floor drain and was gone. He reached down, took Crane by the lapels of his ruined tuxedo, and put him against the structural pillar with sufficient force to confirm that the negotiation was over. He pressed the carbine muzzle under Crane's jaw. Crane was shaking. Not performing fear, actually shaking, the fine involuntary tremor of a body that has just discovered, at a cellular level, that it might not continue. His eyes were darting and very human and very small. Sarah's voice, behind him. "Do it, Lucian. For Marcus. For all of them." He held the position. He looked at Victor Crane. At the shaking, at the smallness, at the absence in those eyes of anything that had ever made a decision based on something other than cost and benefit. A man who had been moving other people's lives around a board for so long, he had forgotten they were lives. He thought about the obsidian cage. He thought about what it was to be sealed inside a nightmare with a burning mind, and everyone who came near you convinced the problem was you. He thought about the architecture of guilt that Crane had constructed around Lucian, and left him to live inside for 3 years. He thought about the names he had recited in the dark like a rosary. He thought about the young man in the wheelchair upstairs, whose eyes had been somewhere unreachable. He thought about Silas's eyes across 30 feet of concrete. "You want to die here," Lucian said. His voice was very quiet. "You want a clean ending, and a narrative your people can work with. A vampire king, an unstable weapon, a tragic incident." He paused. "You want me to give you that?" Crane said nothing. "I have been administering justice for a very long time," Lucian said. "Long enough to know the difference between justice and satisfaction. Killing you right now would satisfy me. It would satisfy Sarah. It would satisfy every name I have been saying in my sleep for 3 years." He let the words land. "But it would not be justice. Justice is what those men are owed, and justice requires that you remain alive to experience every day of what comes next." He lowered the carbine. He removed the silver cuffs from Silas's wrists. Silas, who had crossed the remaining space between them and was standing 2 feet away with the contained expression of a man who has too much to say and the discipline to know this is not the time or place for any of it. And he pressed them onto Crane's wrists instead. He stepped back. He looked at Victor Crane on the wet concrete. Tuxedo destroyed, silver cuffed, the architecture of $4 billion already coming apart in servers across the country. "Wake up in handcuffs," Lucian said. "Watch your empire get taken apart piece by piece. Watch the people you paid reduce their own sentences by testifying against you. Watch 40 years of careful work become the only thing your name means forever." He paused at the ramp. "That is what those men deserved. That is what you owe them. And I intend to make certain you pay it in full." Sirens. Above them. Close. Sarah touched his arm. He turned. Silas was standing behind him. The look on his face was the look of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just been permitted to set it down. No words available for it. Not yet. Perhaps not for some time. Lucian put his hand on Silas's shoulder. That was sufficient. They went out through the maintenance access on the structure's north wall, and the Virginia woods took them in, and the blue lights of the approaching vehicles painted the concrete above where Victor Crane sat in silver cuffs and cold water, waiting for someone to come and tell him what he was now. 6 months later, Montana was conducting its autumn without apology. The diner sat at the edge of a 2-lane highway, with the Bitterroot Range filling the entire western window from floor to ceiling. The coffee was made by a woman named Patty, who had been making it for 30 years and had no patience for the kind that wasn't worth making. The apple pie on the counter had been baked that morning. The television above the counter ran the national news at a background volume. In what legal observers are calling the most consequential verdict in Covenant Tribunal history, former Obsidian Accord CEO Victor Crane was today sentenced to permanent containment in a silver-grade, secure facility with no provision for review or release. The conviction follows the largest intelligence leak in Covenant history, distributed anonymously under the designation Sierra 1. The data revealed a decade-long operation involving fabricated mission intelligence, illegal blood relic trafficking, and the deliberate elimination of operational personnel. 17 individuals within Covenant intelligence have been implicated, including 4 senior officers. Patty refilled the mugs in the corner booth without being asked. She had learned in 30 years that the people who needed their coffee most were usually the ones not asking for it. She didn't pay particular attention to the 3 people sitting there. They were quiet people, the kind who looked like they had come from somewhere difficult and arrived somewhere they intended to stay. The woman was drawing the mountain range on a paper napkin, very small, very precise. The younger man was eating pie with the focused appreciation of someone for whom simple things had recently been restored to their proper value. The older man was watching the window. She refilled and moved on. "They'll keep looking," Silas said quietly, "for Ashbourne." "Let them look," Sarah said, without lifting her eyes from her drawing. "Ashbourne died in a valley 3 years ago. The world accepted that. We confirmed it ourselves. And the Covenant investigation will run another 2 years and implicate people who didn't even know they were implicated." She turned the napkin slightly to improve the angle of a peek, by which point the person they might have been looking for will be entirely unremarkable. A man with a limp, a woman who draws mountains, a younger man eating pie. Silas ate pie. Lucian Voss looked out the window at the Bitterroot Range and thought about the long motion of his life, the campaigns, the territories, the centuries of governance that required constant management and never offered rest. He thought about the obsidian cage and the fever and the names he had recited in the dark. He thought about Crane in silver cuffs on wet concrete. He thought about the weight of Silas's shoulder under his hand in the parking structure, and how little needed to be said for it to mean everything. He thought about what it was to have owed something for a long time and to have paid it. "Silas," he said. Silas looked up. "How's the pie?" Silas considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Best I've had in 3 years," he said. "Possibly longer." Lucian nodded. He picked up his coffee. It did not taste of ash and fever and the long corridor of the obsidian cage. It tasted of the ordinary and unremarkable present, the specific warmth of a specific cup in a specific place where no one was looking for any of them. He drank it slowly. Outside, the mountains held their position against the sky with the patient indifference of things that had been there before him and would be there after, and found nothing remarkable in the fact that a king of 4 centuries was sitting in a diner booth in Montana watching the light move across the peaks. Some things, Lucian thought, do not require governing. Some things simply require being present for. He set the cup down. The light was good. The coffee was real. The man sitting across from him was alive. He was in no particular hurry to be anywhere else.